Hi, everyone. Today we're going to talk about the Bush administration. So, after Ronald Reagan's presidency from 1980 to 1988, President George H.W. Bush is going to take office in 1989. He's only going to be in office for one term, and so that's the 4 years there. But in those 4 years, he's going to accomplish a lot, and there's going to be a lot of things that happen during that presidency. And we'll kind of go into all of those things today, as well as why he's not elected for a second term. So let's start out here by looking at a map here of the Soviet Union. And this is the Soviet Union right before its collapse, which happens during the Bush administration and towards the end of Reagan, right? And so we look at the size of this, and it actually incorporates a lot of Eastern Europe over here, right? But that's going to change for a lot of reasons. And we're gonna look at three major reasons as to why communism in Eastern Europe is going to fall and why there's going to be a breakup of the Soviet Union. So reason number one is going to be the widespread nationalism that's going on within these nations in Eastern Europe. So a lot of these nations are either part of the Soviet Union or they are satellite nations of the Soviet Union. And a satellite nation is basically it's a smaller nation that is influenced by the Soviet Union. So it's not really part of the Soviet Union, but in a lot of ways it's controlled by the Soviet Union. And so a lot of those countries are actually going to start to protest and rebel against communism. And you're going to see a lot of these nations kind of break away and kind of distance themselves there. And when that happens, the Soviet Union is going to lose influence in those areas. They're going to lose resources from those areas, and that's going to affect their economies. So to kind of keep up with that, Mikhail Gorbachev, who comes into office in the Soviet Union about 1985, he's going to come in and he's going to try to change up the system and hopes to kind of like keep the Soviet Union alive. And so he kind of makes some changes to the economic and the political structure. He's actually going to open up the ability for people to kind of voice their opinions to be more public with what they believe. And this is actually going to lead to further protests against the government. And also, he's going to change the economic system. So he's going to add a little bit of capitalistic ideas to the communist ideologies in the Soviet Union. And both of those things are going to kind of go against the Soviet Union and kind of like work against them and kind of lead to their collapse. The other thing is going to be the economic shortages that are going on within the Soviet Union. And so a lot of these things like agricultural declines and not having enough food, which needs to be supplied by the government, right? Because the Soviet Union's a communistic society, which means that everything has to be provided by the government, right? And so food needs to be provided. And if you remember, during Reagan's administration, the United States is increasing their amount of military spending. The Soviet Union is trying to keep up with them. And so they're pulling a lot of money away from agriculture and other areas for the people to kind of keep up with the United States. And this is going to really hurt their economy and anger a lot of people. So we're going to look at some pictures here and some graphs. So over here on this one, it just shows the national economy or the income for the Soviet Union, right? And you see how that drops. It drops and it drops and it drops and it drops until it gets down into here into the late 1980s, where you see it's actually at its lowest amount of income growth. So it's not growing anymore. And a lot of the reason is going to be because a lot of nations are pulling out of the Soviet Union trying to leave. And so this is working against them. And then you mix that together with the increased defense spending and the military spending, and it's going to again work against them. If you look over here, down here in this picture down here, this is actually a line to get bread, right? So it's a bread line, and you're going to see that this is just a symbol of the lack of resources that people were getting within the Soviet Union. And then if we look up here at the top picture up here, this is actually a picture taken from what's called the Velvet Revolution, which was in Czechoslovakia, where the people were kind of protesting against the communist dictatorship within there and kind of protesting against the Soviet Union and their influence. And so you're going to eventually see Czechoslovakia, end its communist government. And this again this is just one example of the many examples that happen. All right, so let's just look here. This is a breakdown of like the nations, right? So these were the red ones are the Soviet Union, all together. And these are like the smaller nations that are inside, but they're all part of the Soviet Union. Over here, these are the allied countries. So these are kind of the satellite countries, right? But in the end, all of these countries here, Belarus, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, right, Uzbekistan, Georgia, they are all going to finally fight for independence and leave the Soviet Union. And afterwards, they will be their own nations, right? And then Russia will just be Russia. And a big symbolic thing that's going to happen is the Berlin Wall coming down in 1989. It's a huge symbol of the end of communism in Eastern Europe. And also, it's going to lead to the reunification of Germany. So Germany will no longer be East Germany and West Germany. It will be one whole country once again in 1990. Again, all this happening during Bush's presidency. Now, this video here, if you want to watch like some of the protests and the people actually going and pulling down the wall, you can watch that on your copy of the notes. Okay, so we're going to move into the Persian Gulf War. So this is one of the major wars that happens, and it's actually one of the first major wars that we have after Vietnam. And it's going to be an important war because, Vietnam did not leave the United States with a good taste in their mouth, right? Afterwards, we kind of feel a little bit embarrassed or ashamed that, we were not able to defeat the Vietnamese, or not that we were not able to, but that we did not stay over there to see it out, right? And so it counts as a loss against the United States. So when we get to the Persian Gulf War, we're putting together all these technologies and utilizing all the technologies and weaponry that we've developed throughout the entire Cold War that, in the expectation that we might go to war with Russia, right, or the Soviet Union rather. So if we were to go to war against the Soviet Union, we wanted to be ready. So we built up all this technology and weaponry, and we never used it until now, right? When we get to the Persian Gulf War, we're going to be able to utilize a lot of that technologies, and we are going to be far superior to the Iraqi forces. And so let's talk a little bit about why this happened. So first of all, Iraq is going to be led by a man named Saddam Hussein. He's down here. That's Saddam Hussein, right? And he's going to lead the country of Iraq, which is located here, right? And along the Persian Gulf, right? The Persian Gulf's right in this area down here. And it actually is an important waterway, especially for the amount of oil that's in that area. And so what's going to happen is Saddam Hussein's actually going to want to invade this small country that's located right at the bottom of Iraq called Kuwait. Now you might ask yourself, well, why does he want to invade Kuwait? Like, what's important about this tiny area here? Well, what's important about them is that they have lots and lots and lots of oil, right? So this area is a very oil-rich region, and it's acting as its own country, right? And Iraq wants to take control over it because if it can take control over Kuwait, it will gain more oil resources along with access to the Persian Gulf, right? Really good access to the Persian Gulf, which will lead to trade and better trading for other nations and stuff. They can get their oil out there. So he wants to move into that area. Well, the United Nations does not grant him the ability to do this. They say, do not do this. You are not allowed to go into there. And they give him a deadline to get out. They say, look, you have 2 weeks to get out of Kuwait. During that time, Saddam Hussein refuses to leave Kuwait, right? He continues to push the troops in there and to occupy Kuwait. So this is where the United States, along with some other allied nations, part of the United Nations, major ones would have been like the United Kingdom, Australia. They are also going to be involved in this. But mainly the United States is going to lead this thing called Operation Desert Storm, which is going to be a massive air and ground assault on the Iraqi forces in Kuwait. The whole war only lasts 42 days. And again, we have technologies that we have been building and military weapons that we have developed that are going to be far more advanced than Iraqis. So that's why one of the reasons that this war is only going to last 40 days. But most of the war is actually going to be done in the air. So for most of those days, we are doing airstrikes on certain targets and like Iraqi forces within Kuwait. And only in the last few days do we actually drop forces like infantry on the ground. And actually, after what they call boots on the ground, meaning that when we put our ground forces in, it only lasts another 100 hours after that until the Iraqi forces are on full retreat to leave. So it's a very short war, and the United States is victorious in the war, and we kind of protect Kuwait and allow it to maintain its independence. Right? And again, there's a video here that discusses a little bit more in depth, so you can actually watch that video. Okay, and one of another major accomplishment that's going to happen is that women, for the first time, are going to be allowed to serve in combat roles within the military forces during a war. So, Persian Gulf War is the first time that American women could serve in combat roles. This is a big step. All right, tune in for part 2.